everybody. My name's Simon, and I'm Head of School of Medicine, Pharmacy and Health at Durham University. Today I want to talk to you about sex. Hope that's okay this early in the day. Okay, so what I want to try and spend a bit of time thinking through with you is why, despite, and I'll show you a little bit about it in a moment, an extremely good evidence base for what positive, comprehensive sex and relationships education can do for young people, in terms of their sexual health and well-being, their capacity to have enjoying, fulfilling, intimate relationships with themselves and their own bodies and with each other, we seem to find this such a huge problem in Great Britain today. Some of you will be aware, indeed, that during our last general election there was some debate about whether or not the teaching about sex and relationships should be mandatory in all British schools, an issue that kind of fell by the wayside. It's been around for decades. And in fact, I'll show some of the concerns that are informing those debates have been around for 100 years or more. Okay, so this is a little graphic showing you something about what influences sex and relationships education, what it looks like and how it works. But let me tell you a story while you consider what's up there. Some of you might have heard it before, or maybe it's apocryphal, but it's such a good illustration of the way that this issue provides us with a set of moral complexities and personal troubles which illustrate just why it's so difficult for us to progress in this area. So this is a story about a family. It's a kind of typical middle-class family, if I'm honest with you, in which there are two young children, maybe they're 6 or 7 years old, sitting at a table, waiting to have their tea. And over here, on the other side of the kitchen, rather gender-typically, Mum's preparing the food. So she's got her back to her children, and they're just sitting there talking, and a little voice pipes up. It's her daughter. And she says, "Mummy, can I ask you a question?" Mum says, "Yeah, of course, you can ask me anything, dear." "Mummy, what's a virgin?" Mum takes a deep breath. It's one of those moments, you know. Those of us who've got children, or those of us who know young children, know this kind of feeling at this point. And she says, "Well, dear, a virgin is what you are before you've made love with somebody, before probably you've had a baby." There's an extraordinarily long, pregnant pause. And the little voice pipes up and says, "So what's extra virgin then?" Okay, it's a bit tired, I know, but you get the point here. What it says to us, these kind of stories, apocryphal or otherwise, is look at the sensitivities on both sides here. Look at the misrecognition among the concerned and engaged parent in this room, in this kitchen, about what to say, how to say it, and what the child's after. And look at the understanding of the child. It's nothing to do with sex, as it turns out. And this is a key part of what I'm trying to illustrate here, which is our evidence base around sex and relationships education tells us there are 4 things we need to do. And they're the following, illustrated here. Comprehensive sex education taught through a spiral curriculum in formal and informal educational environments is key. So that's principally a responsibility of schools, particularly in our nation and the rest of the industrialised Northern West Hemisphere, and indeed as the world, as primary education becomes more readily available to all people. And what this spiralling means is we start with age-appropriate information, a bit like that 6-year-old. We don't start with a detailed description of what virginity is. Maybe the kinds of questions we're asked by 4, 5, 6-year-olds are, where did I come from? The answer they're looking for is not a detailed description of human reproductive sexual activity. Phew, that's a relief, isn't it? What they're looking for is, did I come from Tesco's or did I come out of your tummy? Okay? And that's what we can do. It's actually not that difficult. Of course, by the time we're reaching puberty with children, they do want to know a little bit more about, so how's that going to work in terms of my body? Why is my body changing the ways it is? What does it mean to be becoming a sexually more mature person, adolescent and adult? The second component we have to couple that to is dedicated sexual health and contraceptive services. These are the kind of services that are there for young people, and probably solely for young people, provide age-appropriate information and access to help support treatment care and contraception and birth control as and when they need it. The third component is about community awareness and development. So this means working with parents, with that agonised mother, but also with community leaders, whether they be from faith or civil society more broadly, getting them to understand why this is important and the benefits this might have for their children and their future generations. And the final component involves using the mass media. Historically, that's largely been through poster campaigns, the TV, but of course now what we're talking about is the digital environment, one in which sometimes I think we're manifestly fearful of the kind of saturation even if we're not aware of it personally, we feel is out there, of something that's often been called pornographization, the emergence of sex and sexuality just everywhere a click away. Actually, it can be used for good too, and I'll just touch on that later. Okay, so here's what happens if you do this good sex education. The first things are, there's some text missing there, sorry about that, is that you can see from the arrow pointing up will tell you we get positive change in people's levels of knowledge, awareness, attitudes, and indeed in terms of their positive sexual behaviour. You do that work, you put those services in place, and people have more of the kind of sex they want when they want it, usually later into their sexual initiation rather than earlier. Okay. We also know that several things go down. So anxiety goes down. Sexual ill health can decrease as a consequence of this. And perhaps critically, given some of the anxieties we have about this, the age of sexual debut tends to go up rather than down with more information. Okay, so let me now show you something about, this is bizarre, isn't it? Okay, it's very difficult to show you anything on the screen right now, and apologies for that. If that's the issues, that's the evidence base, and we know what it does. The question I want to address is why it doesn't. So let me take you back that 100 years plus to something that was said by Sigmund Freud. Love him or hate him, right or wrong his theories on human sexuality, a significant figure in surfacing the notion that we all have sex and sexuality, including children. He had some correspondence with a colleague of his called Dr. Forrest, a voluminous letter writer, asking for advice about the following. What should I tell young people? When should I tell them? And how should I tell them? The kind of key critical questions that still circulate around for us now in our own cultural milieu. Sigmund rehearsed a very nice answer in which he basically said, we should just tell them like it's a fact of life, a normal thing. It should all be done by the time they're 10 years old. And we should all have a part to play in that. When he writes back to Dr. Forrest, he also recognises there are some difficulties here. And the things he points to are, I know you're going to be concerned about the possibility of a loss of childhood innocence. Does knowledge lead to experimentation? And is this some way corrupting the potentiality of doing this work? Those three issues and those three questions are still the ones that concern and trouble us now. So I want to talk about 4 dimensions of that I think can help us understand both why we are where we are now and can also be regarded as kind of push and pull factors, things that take us forward in terms of sex education and things that might take us backwards. So the first one is to talk a bit about what I'm going to call pathological concerns and events. Maybe the one that's most prominent in my lifetime and maybe in some of yours is HIV and AIDS. The emergence globally of something that when it began, and I remember that, we thought might be truly pandemic. Its severity is not to be downplayed now, but there was a point at which we had no idea of any serious mechanism for the control of this spread of this infection. Few treatment options and no cures. One of the most significant things that happened in the late 1980s as a consequence was an environment in the UK which was led by a Conservative administration, took what would be regarded, I think, as a progressive step in saying, as a result of this concern, we should talk about HIV/AIDS in school, and we should do it with our adolescent teenagers. It's just a reminder that the stuff that happens out there that sometimes we don't see coming in terms of sexual health concerns can change the way we think about these issues. At that time, we weren't ready. Next time, I'd like us to be ready. The second set of issues, it seems to me, is significant to think about, are those to do with what I'm going to call the local social cultural terrain. That's a rather grand way of saying how we think about these issues in a kind of more broad way. A lovely piece of work was done at the beginning of the 2000s by UNICEF. It looked at the policies in relation to unplanned and unwanted teenage pregnancies in rich and industrialized nations in the Northern Hemisphere. And the idea was to ask the question, most of these countries are concerned about this. And they're concerned about it because in these kind of cultural and economic environments, having children young usually brings social disadvantage. Most people are looking for extended education, have an expectation that they'll live in families where both parents or carers will work, and where for economic reasons, big families are more difficult to support. So they identified the problem troubling all those nations in the world at that time to some degree or other, particularly the US and the UK. Now, interestingly said, when we look at the policies, we see two different kinds of answers. One problem, two answers. One set of answers look like this. They said in those countries that seem to say the problem with teenage pregnancy is this social disadvantage, that it means it's harder to get on in your life as a young man or a young woman, tended to adopt more liberal policies. For example, more sex education, more comprehensive in its nature, more sexual health services and contraception services available to young people, a liberalisation of abortion laws, and more social welfare support. There are another group of nations on the other side, and UNICEF identified these as often being informed by strong religious or moral underpinnings and ideological positions, who took the following kind of policy lines. Fewer contraceptive services, less liberal laws about abortion, clamping down on welfare benefits to support young parents, and critically, not comprehensive, but abstinence-oriented sex education, that which promoted the idea no sex before marriage. Okay, so you can see here some questions about moral orientation kind of pitching into this issue about how we deal with the evidence. Something else significant is what we think is normal or acceptable. What do we think people do? Who do we think they do it with? How often? Where? When? If we know that, maybe we feel that legitimates or mandates going forward. So since the 1990s, we know in the UK, on the back of a series of roughly every decade, mass surveys of sexual attitudes and lifestyles, and indeed data going back to the 50s, there are kind of 4 or 5 major trends. More people have more sex with different partners over their lifetime, on average. Greater numbers of people, so they have concurrent partners. That's 2 or more sexual partners at the same time. We know that the median age for first sexual intercourse among young people in Great Britain is about 16 now for both girls and boys. The so-called early starters tend to be 13, 14 years old, a very small proportion of the population. We also know, rather encouragingly, that condom use is going up, particularly for first sexual intercourse. And finally, and rather more troublingly, we know that more men say that they pay for sex now. What's critical about these data are probably what's going on in your head right now. Where do I belong in that? Am I doing it often enough? Am I doing the right kind of sex? And if I told you the other data point here is more anal and more oral sex, what would you be thinking or feeling right now? And what happens with these sex surveys is they come back into our consciousness publicly. The NatCell surveys, the national surveys, are published every time that they are released as academic papers back through the national press. You can find them one click of a button away on the internet, these beautiful infographics showing you these kind of data. And we know from work done by sociologists and other studies in social sciences, people start to ask that question. Is that me? What does it mean I need to say? If I'm that mother in that kitchen, what does it mean I need to tell this child and when? Okay, the final set of issues I really want to point to are those I think a little bit less familiar to us. And those might be those that relate to issues about the way that we portray sex in the education materials that we use. It's a challenge when I can't show you an image, but perhaps some of you can go back to the kinds of things you might have seen in science textbooks. The one place in the UK where there is an obligation on schools to teach about human sexual reproduction. If you think of those kind of strange cutaway drawings, bodies sliced in half, with the genitals labelled usually, and the internal reproductive sexual organs. And critically, studies have looked at the content of those, the kinds of bodies and the kinds of sex they show. And they only really show one thing: heterosexual sex, penetrative vaginal sex, in pursuit of fertilization and conception, and usually by bodies which are deracinated, de-haired, de-bumped, de-everything, nothing like mine. They send powerful normative beliefs about heterosexuality and the very nature of how you do sex. And one of the most significant findings we're looking at these is a number of those books will talk about male ejaculation and orgasm. One of those books talked about the role of the clitoris in female sexual pleasure and experience. So the very final point I'll just touch on is this, something we don't think about much in the UK right now, and that is population issues, demography. Most of you would be conscious and aware that there was something we called the one-child policy in China. It was never a one-child policy, by the way, and also conscious of the fact that's been repealed recently. But it's just a reminder that in other contexts, other times and other places, issues about human sexuality and what therefore we want to teach our children are more focused on issues about how we are managing our population growth in the shape of demography. Okay, so just 3 concluding thoughts for you then. If this is so troubling, why is that? What are the challenges we face? And let me pick them up in summary for you. They are as follows. Sex education just doesn't have a strong place in curricula in British schools. More so in Scotland and England, but still not strong. And ultimately, one question you might ask is, when most of this isn't examined, how seriously can we take it? Another question we might ask is, how well trained are our staff to do this teaching? It's not easy. It feels unsafe sometimes. And how about young people themselves? How safe do those groups feel to sit down and have a kind of conversation about contraception? What are the topics that get left out? And you can imagine, given what I've said, exactly what those are going to be. The things that we know are so critical in the sex education process, not just the information, but advice and help and indeed training on interpersonal skills. The kind of classic how to say no, but I'd also like to think how to say yes, are just more or less absent. Teaching about sexuality and diversity. And some of you will be familiar with the work of organisations like Stonewall, an extremely significant and important and established lobbying organisation in the UK for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people's rights. Every few years they do a survey of British schools and it shows us something desperate. It shows us that probably 99% of LGBT pupils have at some point been verbally abused by their peers. It shows us that 3 in 5 have been subject to physical harassment and bullying, witnessed by a teacher or another member of staff, and nothing happened as a consequence. Omitting this diversity of sexuality from these programs is desperate for all of us, but particularly for people in these minority groups. So if those are the challenges, what about the opportunities? What can we do about this? Well, I've shown you very briefly something about evidence. I've talked about that. We do know a good deal about what works. It's about applying that in practice. We also know that we need to do something about those kind of environments and structure this better into the kind of work we do, build people's confidence about engagement with these subjects. And finally then, here's a prospectus maybe for change and something for you to take away from me today. The conflicts over sex education are largely really about moral orientation. They feel like they're debates between people arguing about what rights we have. And into that comes this evidence base that can help us maneuver within them. We can also look to those things internationally, such as the Sustainable Development Goals issued by the United Nations, where gender equity and issues remain priorities along with HIV. And finally, and most significantly, there's something I can do, there's something you can do. And that's retain our commitment to trying to ensure that we work with children and young people on the basis of their needs to ensure that they enjoy the right of sexual health, sexual freedom, and sexual pleasure that they are very much entitled to. Thank you very much indeed.